But the Supreme Court says where the prosecution witness was not allowed to be cross-examined by the defense on the material point with reference to the earlier statement made before the police. The Supreme Court held such evidence given by the prosecution remains untested by the defense and cannot be taken as a corroborative piece of evidence against the accused person. Now, I will just bring your attention to section 154, that is FIR. FIR is lodged by the complainant. It may be the victim, it may be any other person. During investigation, what the police do is they will record the statement of the witnesses. Under 161 they will call them, under 162 they will record them. If required, they will record the statement of the witness before the magistrate under 164. They might also record the confession of the victim under section 164 before the magistrate. But merely by recording all these statements, whether it becomes clear? No, it does not become clear. It is only that the police are alleging that I have committed the murder. It does not prove as yet. So now to whether have I committed a murder or not, whether have I committed this particular act or not, how can I disprove it? Because Evidence Act says, as it says, it is a fact. It is a facting issue. Also it says proved, not proved, and disproved, or proved, disproved, or not proved. So the prosecution is trying to prove it. If it is trying to prove it, it is my duty to disprove it, because if the prosecution fails to prove it, anyways benefit of doubt is going to come to me. But if the prosecution proves it, or on the face of it presumes, or on the face of it puts it before the court so as the court may believe that this is proved, then it is my duty to disprove it. So how will I disprove it? I will disprove it only on the basis of cross-examination, because cross-examination is the only weapon, or is one of the most potent weapons in the hands of the defense counsel to destroy the case of the accused person. Now how do I do it? I will have to ask certain questions. Now there comes a chapter of relevancy of facts. What questions can be put, what questions cannot be put. All these things are going to come into existence. The court may not allow a particular question to me. The court may not allow a particular question to be put. So now what do I do? Now at this stage I refer to section 145 of the Indian Evidence Act. Contradictions. I am going to confront, I am going to ask certain questions to the witness, I am going to confront certain things to the witness, I am going to confront the statement of the witness if required to the witness, and ask him, why did you tell this to the police, did you not tell this to the police, why did you not tell this to the police. So I will give you a simple example only for educational purposes. A murder has taken place in a red light area. An XYZ person stands as a complainant. He has seen the murder happening in that particular place. I ask that particular person, what does he do, what is his name, what is his age, who else are there in his family, what is his job, etc., etc., etc. I take out all the relevant answers to these questions. Thereby it makes clear that he is a man working in a bank. His job is from 9 to 6 or 9 to 5 or 10 to 6. There is no necessity for him to go to a red light area at that particular point of time. And at that particular point, I cannot ask him a direct question. that there was no necessity for you to go there. So he may come up with an answer that yes, there was some necessity. So can I ask him a question that you had gone there to visit XYZ person or a prostitute? Whether the court can object to such question? No, the court cannot object to such question because it is very much relevant, because the act has taken place, the murder has taken place in a red light area where a man of his stature, with such family background and with the given circumstances, had no reason to go there at that particular point of time, and it is quite improbable that he remains present at that particular point of at that place at that particular point of time. So I may destroy his theory in my fashion, but the question has to be relevant to the fact. So as far as my questions are relevant, the court has to allow me to ask such questions. But if the court does not allow, I have n number of remedies. I can make an application, I can move the higher court, etc., 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 etc. But landmark judgment of Tahsildar Singh is available on this point. What are contradictions? How much it is important? How to put contradictions? This is nothing but a part of a fair trial. The court has to understand. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't understand what is the relevancy. I cannot open all my cards before the court at that particular point of time, before the witness, that why I am going to ask this question. The court has to also understand and has to be patient enough and has to give me sufficient time to cross-examine the witness. Why? Because it is the life of one accused person who is at stake. This has to be understood by the court. And that is why the Supreme Court in Badri versus State of Rajasthan, 1976, Supreme Court, page number 560, had held that where the prosecution witness was not allowed to be cross-examined by the defense on the material point. Now again I am quote unquote, I am saying material point, with reference to the earlier statement made before the police, his evidence stand untested by cross-examination and cannot be accepted as an corroborative piece of evidence or corroborative of the previous statement of that particular witness. Now, at this particular time, section 145 of Indian Evidence Act comes to the aid of the cross-examination or the defense counsel. Further, to strengthen the fair trial, the accused, wide section 313, is given an opportunity to state what he wishes to state about the evidence that has been tendered against him, what he has to say against the witnesses who have stated against him and why they are stating such things, and what is his theory or what is his stand on this whole evidence which has been tendered against him. Now the major difference between examining the witnesses on oath and taking the statement or obtaining the statement or recording the statement of the accused under 313 is that the evidence is taken on oath, whereas recording of statement under 313 is not on oath. Because again the cardinal principle comes into existence that the accused cannot be compelled to stand as a witness. The accused cannot be compelled to be a witness against his own interests. And that is why whatever is stated under section 313 is always taken as a statement, not on oath. This statement can be used as a piece of corroborative evidence or the corroborative value can be given to such a statement only if the defense of the accused and the statement of the accused differ or vary, or are one says west and one says east. Otherwise, if they are totally contradictory, it can be used against the accused. But otherwise, these statements are merely an opportunity to give to the accused person that these are the witnesses that they are stating. That witness number 1 states that he has seen you running with a knife behind B. Witness number 2 says that he has seen you stabbing B. Witness number 3 says that he has seen you running away after that particular act. Witness number 4 says that you were washing the knife after committing that particular act, or he saw you washing the knife stained with blood. Now what do you have to say about all these things? The accused will be given a fair opportunity to explain the circumstance. He has to also explain why he thinks that the witnesses are lying against him. But in this fair trial, unfortunately, fortunately, with due respect to the judicial system, I would say that when the courts are recording statements under 313, the questions are so typical that the police filed the charge sheet, whether it is correct or wrong. It is correct. What will the accused say about it? The police went to the spot and they conducted the spot panchanama. How can the accused talk about it? He was not present over there. The police took the blood samples or swabs or whatever from the victim and sent it for chemical analysis. Why will the accused have knowledge about all these things? He is not concerned with it. It is the part and parcel of the investigation. Unnecessary questions should be avoided by the judicial members or the judicial officers so as to reduce the burden upon the staff of the court, upon the accused also, because he sometimes does not understand what to answer. Because the lawyer cannot stand before the court and assist the accused in answering to the question, because these are the questions put by the court to the accused person. And such court can put any question to the accused person at any point of time whenever he feels appropriate. Not necessarily only under 313. The court has the right to put the accused in the witness box and ask him any question at any point of time. So much of importance is given to section 330. Lastly but the most important part, the concept of atrefous acquit and atrefous convict. That is, if a person is tried and acquitted or convicted of an offence, he cannot be tried again for the same offence or on the same facts for any other offence. This doctrine has also been enshrined in Article 20, subclause 2 of the Constitution of India, and also finds place under section 300 of the CRPC. Now, accused cannot, first of all, once tried and acquitted, he cannot be tried for the same offence. For example, the offence is of burglary. He has been put to trial. At the same time, another burglary has been committed at some another place or in the same the concept of fair trial has therefore been there to eliminate the human, erratic, erroneous, non-application of mind behavior in the form of appeal, which will afford I will again give you a simple example. Fair trial, fair judgment, fair hearing. Merely because the accused has been convicted or acquitted does not mean that the judge is correct or wrong. His interpretation may be different on a particular point of view. So the concept of appeal has always been given to the accused person. So I will refer to a very important judgment, Sharad Birdichan Sarda versus State of Maharashtra. In this case was tried. This was a He was a doctor. The accused was a doctor. He was also tried for the offence of conducting for committing the murder of his wife. Now, a learned lawyer, Mr. Bide from Pune, had conducted this trial. In this particular trial, the Sessions Court had convicted the accused. This was a case of circumstantial evidence, where no direct evidence was available as to whether the accused has committed the murder or not. The High Court confirmed the conviction of the accused. This matter went to the Supreme Court, where Mr. Jethmalani represented the accused person. The interpretation of the Supreme Court was to the benefit of the accused, and this laid down the famous case of Panchashil for circumstantial evidence, that is Sharad Birdichan Sarda. At what circumstances or what are the factors to be considered for the chain of circumstance to be established? What are the five principles that are to be taken into consideration in case of circumstantial evidence? Now, why I am giving an example of this particular case is, the lawyer in the trial court was given sufficient opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses. What the court appreciated after giving opportunity is a different issue. This will still amount to a fair trial, because the court has given you opportunity and it has its own interpretations, it has its own way of interpreting a particular evidence. It may consider the accused guilty or not guilty. That does not mean that the system is unfair with the accused person. But giving a fair opportunity, that means again giving an opportunity to the accused or the defense counsel to put questions at length. And this opportunity afforded to the accused in the trial court was the only causa causans which led to the acquittal of the accused by the Supreme Court. Now you ask me why. The simple answer to this is, the cases of circumstantial evidences are like, upon the circumstantial evidences available, not a direct evidence. Circumstantial evidence can itself become a very big piece of evidence. The questions put by the defense counsel at length, to a larger extent, bringing on record the contradictions and the omissions with the help of section 145 of the Indian Evidence Act, was afforded by the trial court to the defense counsel. Because of this, the Supreme Court appreciated that these circumstances cannot be considered as standing against the accused, and hence we are giving the benefit of doubt to the accused person. It was Sri Jethmalani who conducted this trial who appeared in this appeal before the Supreme Court, and after acquittal of the accused person, it was Mr. Jethmalani who specifically stated, this is what I have heard from my seniors, that it was not it is not me who should be praised for this work, but it is the lawyer in the trial court who has conducted an excellent cross-examination, which has led to the acquittal of the accused. So the foundation of the trial was strong. So for the foundation of the trial to be strong, whether the court convicts you or acquits you is not a question. But if you want to succeed in the higher courts, in the appellate jurisdiction, your foundation has to be strong. And if that foundation is strong, there is a fair trial given to you. And on this note, I would like to again reiterate that what are the basic concepts of fair trial? Section 207, Section 211. Section 207 is supply of free copies to the accused. Section 211, reading out the charges to the accused, reading out specific allegations against the accused along with the sections explaining him as to for what he is going to be put for to trial for. Thirdly, ascertaining the presence of the accused, allowing him to have the defense counsel of his choice, or to afford him a lawyer from legal aid. Fourthly, to secure the presence of the accused before the court of law during trial, or at least at the time of recording of the evidence. If the accused is found not fit for trial, the court should proceed as per the provisions of section 328, etc., etc., etc. And then the trial should be resumed only after he is fit for trial. The evidence should be recorded before the accused. Opportunity should be given to the accused opportunity should be given to the counsel of the accused to put relevant questions, and ample and sufficient opportunity be given. Next important point, the accused should be asked questions as per section 313 to give him an opportunity to give the court an explanation as to why the witnesses are talking against him, or what are the conditions, or why do you think that they are stating so and so. And most importantly, the judge has to sit with an unbiased mind, with an absolutely mindset which is considered as a clean slate. He should not have a bias against the accused. It should not so happen that he has not liked the face of the accused and he thinks that he is a criminal, or he looks like a criminal, that is why he is a criminal. No, it cannot be so. So in such circumstances, all these factors are to be considered, and only then will a fair trial be given. And the most important, for the trial to be a fair trial, it was the practice which was in practice by earlier sessions courts, that the schedules were given to complete the trial within a specified time would be the most beneficial thing to the accused person, because he has to languish in the jail. Earlier the judges used to take a schedule, from this date to this date, within 1 week you are going to complete this. So the trial used to complete within a week, the trial used to complete within 15 days, the trial would complete within 1 month, 2 months, not more than that. Now because of the pendency, because of the load, the trial, and because of some of the tactics of the defense counsels also, the trial gets elongated. The trial keeps on going on and on and on and on, and this is what makes the accused languish in the jail. Only if he is on the bail, only if he is on bail, then that's a different issue. But being on bail is not going to be beneficial to him for a long time, because today or tomorrow he is going to face the consequences of the same. So for a fair trial, the court has to be an absolutely neutral man. The prosecution has to come up with only facts of the case. The prosecution should not act as prosecutor. Prosecution is not considered as a hangman. He is not to hang the accused. He is to only bring the facts before the court of law. And the most important thing, when the court is sitting as a third person, as an umpire, he cannot sit merely as an umpire, but with an unbiased mind, he has to actively participate in the trial, thereby deciding what is to be done and what is not to be done at the relevant point of time. And the judge plays the most important role in giving a fair trial to the accused person. Thank you.